Hello, everyone. Welcome to panel 7. It looks at Europe and what's happening in the United States with a transatlantic comparison on fiber deployment. I wanted to reframe the conversation on basically the regional approaches to fostering future-proof connectivity, because what's working and maybe what could be better done, right? So we have a fantastic panel today. It's quite an honor for me to moderate. I'm Alexia Gonzalez-Fanfalon. I'm the head of the Connectivity Services and Infrastructure Unit at the OECD. This is a working party that gathers regulators across 38 OECD countries, so we're very much interested in this topic. And today, I have a fantastic panel starting with Jose Antonio Vasquez. He is Chief Executive Officer at Onivia. It's basically the first fiber wholesale network in Spain. We also have Jimmy Todd, who grassroots type of deployment. It was the first cooperative in the United States of fiber deployment in Kansas, and then expanded elsewhere. We have Laura Fernandez, who is Chief Operating and Strategy Officer at Radius Global Infrastructure. It's a digital infrastructure investment firm. She will talk more about it in the introductory remarks. Gary Bolton, who is President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association in the United States. And we also have Alessandro Gropelli, Director General of Connect Europe, who they represent large connectivity providers in Europe. So a vast approach that we're having. And I will start just before giving the floor to our very distinguished panelists for their introductory remarks, where they will talk about what's their role in the connectivity ecosystem and what are the main policy levers in order to boost this fiber deployment. I would just want to start with a picture, if we can get the slides on the screen. And because I think a picture is worth 1,000 words. In terms of how networks are changing in the OECD and across the world, we know that there's more integration of AI and cloud, there is more openness of networks, there is a need for more reliable and resilient connectivity, and networks are evolving, as we've seen today in the ground floor of this conference. And how do we foster this future-proof connectivity? Well, it has a lot to do also with the policy and regulatory frameworks that are providing those incentives to invest, and as well the competitive conditions in these markets. But one thing is for sure, digital infrastructure today is critical infrastructure, and it's a fundamental pillar for economic security and the resilience of our economies, as well as growth and productivity. So this is the picture that I wanted to just set the scene for this great panel today. We've seen a huge growth in fiber deployment post-COVID. Across the OECD, at the end of 2019, we had 27% of fiber subscriptions in total fixed broadband. At the end of 2024, this was 47%. The share of gigabit subscriptions has multiplied times 6 in these 5 years. So that's an impressive growth. And here you'll see in baby blue European countries. And in red, we see the OECD average. In yellow, we have the United States is below the OECD average. So just to say, what are these figures? For example, the share of fiber of the top 10 leaders in the OECD, 6 of them are European countries. We have one of those countries, Spain, where it's top 3 after Korea, Iceland and Korea, where they have more than 89% of fiber and total fixed broadband subscriptions. But of the top 10, most of them have above 75%. And there's obviously, there's a lot of heterogeneity in Europe as well. The 3 laggards at the OECD are also European countries. We have Belgium, Austria, and Germany with other types of technology. But the US is there, but I also want to say that there's growth rates, right? In the past year, the growth rate in the United States has been 18% in fiber deployment. In the United Kingdom, 57%. And in Germany, albeit it's in a lower rank, they've grown 23%. So overall, there is momentum. And that's the name of this conference, right? So with this, just to give this picture and let you to it, I would like to now let the panelists give their opening remarks to give the flavor and what's their perspective in each part of the ecosystem. Yeah, you can go up if you would like.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Do you hear me well? Yeah. Hello, everybody. I would like to start giving deep thanks to FTTH Council organization, to Vincent and all the team for giving Onivia the opportunity to be here today. To make a brief introduction of Onivia, we are the largest fiber wholesale operator in the Spanish market. We define ourselves as a neutral operator because we offer our model, our infra, to any other company which is interested in providing connectivity to the end user. I'm talking obviously about operators. We have all the big guys, the tier 1 operators, but also all the ecosystem in mid and small size operators all over Spain. But also other companies. We'll talk about that later. We define ourselves as an independent operator because our model implies that we open the network to everybody. We have been working very hard since the beginning of the company almost 7 years ago in order to eliminate barriers. Talking about CapEx investment, barriers to get connected to the network, and also in terms of time to market. We are able to connect any single operator between 4 to 8 weeks, depending on the complexity of the project on their side. So that provides us a speed and capacity of connecting more and more customers. And finally, we are obviously made of our customers. We have more than 110 operators already connected, aiming to reach probably 150, 180 at the end of this fiscal year. We are supported by 3 investors, Macquarie Capital, Arjun Infrastructure, and Aberdeen Investments, that are supporting the project since the beginning and providing us the resources to continue growing. Just showing our network, we are currently covering all provinces in Spain with plus than 1,400 municipalities, 10.2 million fiber homes today. We are growing that, and we will finish this year with plus 11 million fiber homes. And we ended that last natural year with plus 1.6 million end customers using our network. Looking into the future, because we have been always talking about wholesale market, we have been also preparing the company for the next stage. So here are some targets that we will aim to finish at the end of this natural year. One is, at the end of the year, we will be reaching 22 million fiber homes passed. This will be made of 2 components, 11 million fiber homes owned by Onivia, and another 11 million that will come as a result of different third parties agreements we are reaching with several vendors, other companies in the industry. With this, we will become the first wholesale national coverage operator in the Spanish market, and we will be able to provide service almost everywhere in the market. Second of all, we are already prepared for XGS-PON technology. Plus 88% of our network is delivering XGS-PON up to 10 gigabytes symmetrics. We launched the commercial service by September last year, and we are offering it. We are the only wholesale operator which is offering XGS-PON to all its customers. Again, linking to our open platform concept. We want the last technology and the best network open to everybody. And finally, to conclude my introduction, we are also, I was saying at the beginning, we are an ISP-focused company, but we are also opening the network to new businesses. Mainly, we are seeing that there are companies coming from other industries that are starting to enter into the telco arena. So we are more than happy with that. And we are working with utilities, we are working with energy companies, IoT companies, and other industries like B2B, in which we were not present up to now. Okay? So this is the story, very executive, of the last 7 years. Let's jump to the next.
Thank you very much, Jose Antonio. Jimmy.
Thank you. I'm Jimmy Todd. I'm the CEO and General Manager for Nextech. We started as a rural telephone cooperative. So we operate in a very rural, small town area across central to a northwest part of the state. And the reason I mention that is because we operate in areas where the larger carriers chose not to come and serve. And it was through efforts, through communities working together, seeking funding from federal and state sources to build out the network, that we were able to build out and continue to expand our footprint. So beyond our cooperative, we have reached out into neighboring communities and edged out to provide them fiber service. As mentioned earlier, we were the very first company that provided fiber to the home services in a rural community in the United States. And this was back in the mid-90s. From there, we have continued to find different programs, whether it be the FCC's Rural Universal Services Program, or through USDA, the Rural Utilities Service, low-cost loans, grants, things that we could leverage to be able to continue and expand that network. Today we have over 10,000, or approximately 10,000 miles of fiber. That's route miles. And it extends across over 11,000 square miles, or approximately 30,000 square kilometers. In this area, again, being small communities, you're still looking at about 35,000 customers. So you can see the density is pretty low, which adds to the challenge of building it out. But you see what we have been able to do in our part of the state. We're also part of a statewide fiber network, where peers like ours have put together a middle mile network that reaches across the entire state of Kansas. And through that cooperative effort, even though some are family-owned businesses or other types of community-owned businesses, we work together to provide fiber connectivity and reach all across the state of Kansas with connectivity going into neighboring states. And through that, we connect to other networks similar to ours. Not only the large providers, but other states have put together similar statewide fiber networks based on what the small providers have done together. And that effort is through a group called Inditel. And so you take the statewide fiber networks, which provides us scale at a more local level, and then you work with the larger providers and folks in the Inditel network, and that allows us to have that type of connectivity that spreads across the U.S. So I look forward to the discussion, and I'll pass it over to Laura.
Thank you very much, Jimmy, for the rural deployment. Laura, your turn.
Thank you very much, everyone. First of all, thank you so much to FTTH Council for the kind invitation to join you today. I don't have slides, so I will do a quick introduction of our company. Radius Global Infrastructure is a leading international telecommunications and digital infrastructure investment firm. We're focused in the acquisition and management of digital infra assets, from really cell sites, leases, to towers, switching, fiber aggregation points, data centers, and really all the new asset classes that underpin the development of the increased connectivity across all regions. We own more than 13,000 leases across 23 countries, and we have deployed already more than 3.3 billion in capital invested. As of today, we operate in 5 continents. And Radius Global Infrastructure is currently backed by EQT, the Swedish private equity firm, and the Canadian Public Sector Pension Investment Board. Our approach is very simple, really. We provide capital that supports network expansion, allowing really operators to retain full operational control and be flexible in terms of the long-term strategic goals. We always see capital as an enabler for growth, and we want to make sure that each community we operate in can benefit and enjoy for a best-in-class connectivity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. Gary.
Good morning or good afternoon. Gary Bolton, Fibre Broadband Association. And we have about 660 companies that we represent across the U.S. Half of those are network operators, and then the other half is on the supply side. So from drawing and building fiber, like whether it's a Prysmian or a Corning or Lightera, to the electronics companies, whether it's Nokia, Adtran, Calix, to connectivity, to also fulfillment and the network engineers and so forth, and even out to public officials that we represent. And so in the US, we've been in the largest fiber investment cycle in history. What's really important is that coming out of COVID, we obviously saw a big bump in investment. But back, this slide shows kind of in the last 20 years or so, from 2004, really started off with really one provider, Verizon, Fios, and then kind of became two providers, AT&T and Verizon. And at the end of last year, which was a record deployment of 11.8 million homes passed in 1 year, if I look at kind of our ability based on supply chain and labor, 12 million seems to be like kind of what the maximum we could possibly do. And we went from 8.3 million homes passed 2 years ago to 9.1 million homes passed to 11.8. So we're still on this rocket ship of investment. But what's really interesting is the number of providers. So what this chart is showing you is that green area, which was the large tier ones, the AT&T and Verizon, went from being 100% of deployment to 60%. So last year, 40% of deployment was done by whether it's rural operators like Jimmy, or it's electric co-ops, municipalities, regional operators, and then also cable operators are largely moving into fiber deployment. So we've seen a big surge in the number of fiber providers. As a matter of fact, in the last 6 months, so the FCC does broadband data collection, and every 6 months, providers have to be able to submit to the FCC how many homes they pass with fiber. And we saw that there was 42 new fiber providers added in the last 6 months, and 71 providers doubled their footprint in the last 6 months. So it's not just large providers, but there's a huge participation as in kind of what I'll call this investment cycle, and then kind of layered on in the US is now the AI infrastructure investment cycle. So we're having this perfect storm of, in the midst of one investment cycle, all of a sudden start another investment cycle. So it's, and we'll get into that in the policy discussion, but it's a very robust environment. And so what we've seen is, in the last 5 years, we deployed more fiber than all the years previously. So we did 46 million in the last 5 years. And so we looked at the next 5 years, so by the end of the decade, there's about 60 million homes left to pass, which you'd think be the end of the story. But what it actually is, it's more like 130 million homes, because we're seeing, where we are is we're seeing accelerated rate of second, third, and fourth passings. So the take rate in the US when you're the first person with fiber is about 45%. But when you have 2 or more providers, it's 60% uptake of fiber adoption. And so what we're seeing is that there's a strong business case to be the second, third, and even fourth provider. So the total addressable market just for fiber to the home is very robust. It's going to be, again, we've done 100 million homes passed in totality in the last, since the beginning of history, and we still have another 130 million homes of addressable market. So it's very robust. The other thing, let's see, did I skip one? Yeah. So the other thing I wanted to mention too is, what we have is, from a policy perspective, Congress likes to define, or the FCC or any political body likes to define broadband by a speed. You use speed as a proxy. And so today in the US, it's 100 megabits downstream, 20 megabits upstream. And that's really very, very short-sighted, because what the data shows is that when you're a fiber provider and you're a fiber subscriber, that fiber subscribers use AI, 75% of fiber subscribers use AI daily, where as the quality of connection goes down, the participation in AI goes down. So it goes down to 60% in cable, fixed wireless, all the way down to less than 10% of satellite users are participating in AI. Also, we're seeing the type of devices. So when you're using fiber, you're largely doing work from home, telehealth, online education. So you are using your desktop or PC or a very robust platform, you're using very rich media applications, and as your quality of your connection goes down, you're using, largely when you get to cell phones, satellite, you're using your cell phone and doing some just basic email and social media. And so again, the experience changes completely depending on the quality connection. So we'll talk a little more about that as we get into the discussion.
Thank you very much, Gary. And Alessandro, last but not least.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Alessandro Groppelli, Director General of Connect Europe. As Alexia said, we represent the main providers of connectivity in Europe. We have vertically integrated operators, cable guys, and also a couple of sizable wholesale-only companies. Let me tell you how do we see the situation of fiber to the home in Europe right now. Well, as you know, Europe is doing well. So 77% of the population is covered by fiber to the home. That's a good number. It puts us on top and in the lead in the world. And I'm also proud to say that 54% of this investment in Europe came from our members, so from the main operators. So they are driving, or they're part of the engine of the fiber to the home story. So is it all nice and good? Of course, there are challenges also in Europe, and I want to share with you how we see the challenges in the European market right now. Here, on the left-hand side of the slide, you see that the cumulative investment in fiber has been going up consistently in Europe, both per capita and per premise. So this is the good news here. And again, proud that 54% of that came from our members. However, on the left side, you see another number, which is the capital intensity. So how much of the revenues were reinvested in CapEx by European operators. And you see that there, the Connect Europe members lead the pack again. So you can look at this number both in positive and in negative terms. How I look at it, because I've been with the association now for 10 plus years, is that we have been stretching the investment capacity of the sector, which is possibly why we come also to that other number that I put at the end of the slide, which is that at the current investment pace, if we don't change the pace of investment, in 2030 we will still have almost 42 million Europeans who don't have fiber to the home. 42 million people is a country like Poland. So from a policy and political viewpoint, but also from a strategy viewpoint, this is not acceptable. What are the reasons from that, from our viewpoint? As a trade association, we identify three main reasons, and then I know that in the panel we will go deeper. So I'll summarize them for you. One, overall, the telecom market in Europe is fragmented. So we would like to see more consolidation to give a bit more investment power to operators. Second one, we also think that the market in Europe is over-regulated. We will discuss later about the Digital Networks Act that the Commission proposed, so I will tease you a bit here, and you will hear from me later on what we think, whether this is moving in the right direction or not. And the last one is, of course, demand. Demand remains a problem. There is a gap between the coverage and the uptake in Europe, and there should be measures to help that. In summary, and then I'll leave it for the debate, what we would like to see at Connect Europe is that the EU moves from a situation that is driven by regulation to a situation that is driven by growth and return of investment, and we'll go deeper into that later.
Thank you very much, Alessandro. Thanks. This is a great segue for our first round of questions on exactly that. What are the policy enablers and what are the main challenges? So let me turn here to my left to Jose Antonio from your neutral or wholesale perspective, neutral fiber perspective. What are those regulatory frameworks that have enabled, for example, business model like the one you have in Spain? And what are the remaining obstacles?
Thinking about the Spanish market regulation, I think we have benefit from one of the best regulatory frameworks from, if we compare it with the rest of Europe. We can basically talk about three elements. One is the common use of ducts that in Spain we call Marco, and it's regulated use of infrastructure of ducts. The second one is related to data centers that were also regulated for the use for the OLTs, for the equipment, that is usually called OBA. And the third one was a regulated commercial offer that is not any longer used because it's not necessary as the market is very competitive, called NEVA. So the existence of this regulatory framework has been critical to shape the market in Spain when we talk about rollouts, because if you look into the market now, almost 90% of deployments done in Spain during the last 10 years have been made using these ducts, using these data centers that were regulated. So on an affordable pricing, on an affordable basis, and with an affordable use, okay? So this was critical. Having that was critical to get not only one fiber deployment, but several fiber deployments, ensuring what we were saying previously, that is enough space for several operators to fulfill take-ups, okay? So one big element is if you have the right regulatory framework, things work, okay? And I have to send a message here, which is important for us as a neutral operator. We need predictability and certainty on these regulated infrastructures. It's really relevant. I know the Spanish regulator is looking into it. I know the European Commission with this new DNA is also looking into it. But if something works, do not change it. Okay, so it's the first clear message I would like to send. The second element that has helped a lot is Spanish rollouts and fiber success is the public and private co-investment. As you know, in Spain, since 6 years ago, there have been a program that was initially called PEVA, then UNICO, in which the government was trying to invest, and we did it, 1 billion euros in order to deploy fiber to rural areas that were more complicated and also probably not profitable as metropolitan ones. So out of that 1 billion, 647 were invested by the government and the rest by private companies who did the rollout. And that was a key element also to arrive to what we have now, which is plus 90% of coverage in rural areas, and helping to close the digital breach in those critical areas in Spain. More than 35% of population in Spain, around 5-6 million people lived in rural areas. Okay, so two elements: having the good regulatory framework, having the good relationship between public and private co-investment have been the two key elements, in my view, of the success. And what have to do to improve? If we see Europe and we see your graphic, we see that there are two speeds in Europe. One countries like Denmark or Spain or France that are really above, plus 90% of coverage and doing very well, probably because they have these three elements and others that could help also to contribute. Also, I didn't mention neutral operators as us are contributing to invest that money to progress on rollouts. But there are other countries which, despite making big efforts, are not reaching that, okay? I'm talking about countries as Germany, Greece, or Czech Republic, okay? Which are even below 10% in some cases, okay? What is the reason for that? I think we have been talking too much about a strategy. What are the objectives of coverage? And we have also been talking about take-ups, which is very relevant, as has been said. But we are not focusing on execution. And this is related with what we were saying before about having the right framework, providing, improving the permitting side. Each country has different policies for that. It's difficult. There are more things to discuss, demographic issues, cost issues, but we need to focus on execution. And we need the right framework regulation to improve the execution in those countries, okay? And probably also some public and private investment to help the private companies to do these efforts, okay? So that's my view.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So food for thought on the pro-competitive regulatory framework, how it has worked. As they say in English in the United States, it ain't broke, why fix it? But of course, there's still a lot to do with implementation, so great for those remarks. Which is a good segue because you mentioned rural deployment. So from the rural deployment perspective, in low-density areas, which you did mention, Jimmy, with your map, what are those policy gaps? What could help you reach more customers? What do you see from the perspective of the United States?
So, the thing that probably helps most with rural deployments, and I think everybody here can appreciate that, is funding. I mentioned earlier Universal Services Fund, which is a fund that is designed to ensure that rural areas have the same type of connectivity at a comparable price as what you would have in an urban area. This is based on an assessment for voice services. Now, that needs to change because it's now supporting broadband networks. I hope, and I've been very active in trying to get those changes taken place in the U.S. But beyond that is not only are there things like this, but there are also low-cost grant opportunities through USDA, the Department of Agriculture, the Rural Utilities Service, low-cost loans and grants that to facilitate build out in these rural areas. Without these types of mechanisms, it would be very difficult, cost prohibitive to build out to an area where in some cases to get to a small town, I have to go 30 miles, okay? When I have an average density in a large portion of my service area is less than one home or business per square mile. That is a huge area, right? But if you don't have the type of connectivity, you're not going to be able to run the small businesses in these towns. You're not going to be able to have rural farms and ranches that operate in today's global market. And so you see all of the necessary requirements for the connectivity. These are elements that help. One of the things in the U.S. that I think has been beneficial is a light regulatory touch when it comes to broadband. And because of that, you don't have a lot of restrictions placed in the telecom arena or in the broadband arena as you had in the telecom arena. So I think that's allowed more organizations to start becoming broadband service providers than what you saw in more of a traditional telecom market because you don't have the same obstacles to entry. And so people are seeing opportunities and they're taking advantage of that and they're making the investments, leveraging federal and state programs as they can.
Great. Thank you so much, Jimmy. So you bring another element to the puzzle, which is the role of public funding or state aid, as they call it in Europe, coupled with all the efforts from the grassroots or community networks, which brings us, you talked about long-term investments, so how capital intensive this industry is, which is great because we have Laura from the financial or investment perspective in digital infrastructure. So can you please tell us, what are those policy conditions that attract this long-term investment, and how can regulatory certainty help, especially because you're in 23 markets, right?
Yes, that's correct. That's true. So look, as investors, for us, it's very important that we partner with really operators with a long-term view, and this is critical. We provide immediate capital, and we do that in exchange for real estate interest that underpins critical digital infrastructure. We partner with operators, and we are there for the long run. That gives operators really the opportunity to accelerate network deployments. They're very capital intensive. Provides some, of course, financial flexibility, allows them to think long-term while maintaining full control of the operation. So that is critical. When radio started, we started probably 15 years ago looking into ground leases, tower deployments. As we started partnering with operators across the globe, we saw the need for additional capital in new asset classes in the digital infra space, meaning fiber aggregation points, switches, DAS, and data centers. And our collaborative model has really helped unlock the capital required to accelerate those deployments. Talking about policy levers, really, we have seen throughout the last years instances, and to your point, Jimmy, in the US, right, in the early 2000s, where there were some intentional aim from the regulator to refrain from intrusive regulation, right? The refrain from imposing unbundling regulation on fiber networks. And that really enabled the explosion, and Verizon starting with the first mass market FTTH product Fios, followed by AT&T, and that provided connectivity to tens of millions of households in the US. In Europe, we have seen other opportunities were enabler for further investment that were quite targeted. And at the beginning, we touched on Spain, the opportunity and the approach that in Spain we had on access on DAX that also accelerated the deployment of fiber networks. And across Europe, the opportunity also to develop these wholesale-only networks. Currently, what we are also seeing across the US and Europe is the willingness to accelerate or support at the right pace the copper switch off. And I see all these as very positive indications in terms of direction of travel.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And Gary, coming back to the United States, so we've been doing a little bit of ping pong in both regions. So what are the policies that have effectively accelerated fiber, but maybe what also has not worked so well and people were expecting to work, for example, on public funding or others?
Yeah, let's start with what doesn't work. And so in the US, they've had a number of federal programs. One was called the Connect America Fund. And I started earlier talking about when Congress or the FCC uses speed as a proxy for broadband. The US did a national broadband plan and they defined broadband as 1 megabit. And then the Connect America Fund said it's 4 megabits downstream, 1 megabit upstream. And so when you use that, then they took $6 billion and said, okay, we're going to go out and get all the unconnected houses, unserved, underserved houses at 4 megabits by 1 megabit. And so what did you do, right? As vendors, you say, okay, well, you should use this DSL technology. You can be able to do that. And then a couple of years later, they said, well, really, broadband's 10 by 1. Like, oh, okay, well, then we have the next version of DSL. So we'll go upgrade all your network to the next level of DSL. And then they say, well, no, it should be 25 by 3. And again, when you do this incremental approach, you're subsidizing the same locations over and over and over again. And again, you have not achieved anything other than, it's good for vendors selling a bunch of old DSL stuff into VDSL and on up. But as far as being able to provide connectivity for rural America. And overall, the CapEx in the US, 8.7% of fiber CapEx is from government subsidies this last 6 months, 8.7. That means the other 91.3% is private investment. And so a policy that has worked is President Trump had something called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which mixed reviews, but one aspect of that was very positive of fiber. It had tax benefits and 100% bonus depreciation so that private investment you generated tons of free cash flow. For example, an AT&T, Verizon were each generating $3 billion in free cash flow each. Charter, Comcast, $2.7 billion of free cash flow. So every $1 billion of free cash flow relates to 830,000 homes connected with fiber. And so we saw that now these companies, there's not an obligation for them to take their free cash flow and spend it on investment in fiber. Sometimes they take it and they buy back stock and other things, use it for other things. But what we saw is that AT&T, the second they had this bonus depreciation, they committed to 1 million more homes, 1 million more homes per year of investment in fiber. And so overall, it generated $5 billion of fiber investment per year. So this dwarfs any kind of public subs, taking taxpayer money, but actually being able to incent the private sector to invest their own money on things that are accretive. And so, private investment, they're looking at what's going to be the best return on their investment, and that's fiber.
Thank you very much, Gary. And so from the European perspective, Alessandro, let's go a bit deeper in your initial remarks and maybe what are those policies that have worked and maybe what are the obstacles?
Cool. So if I look at it from a European perspective, because I'm Italian, it's a week in which I cannot agree with the Americans because, geez, there was the whole problem with the Vatican. But there is one thing that I need to give to the Americans.
Come on now.
And the Pope is American. There is one thing that I need to give to the Americans, even this week, in which it is difficult for me to agree with them. Light touch regulation. It has been mentioned in a few interventions. So where are we now in Brussels? We are at a point in which the Digital Networks Act has been proposed. I think markets reacted positively to the news that there will be maybe unlimited spectrum licenses. That was a good signal that analysts took note of. Unfortunately, the same signal, we didn't see it for fiber, because otherwise I would have read joyous analyst reports on, hey guys, come on, flood the European market with the fiber investment. Why? I think precisely because, in a way, the Digital Networks Act is very cautious and tries to strike the right balance between all the different stakeholders. And in doing so, maybe, in our view, it's a bit too conservative and it's keeping too much the status quo, which is one that was conceived literally at the end of the 90s when we still had monopolies in Europe. And so the problem at stake back then was liberalize the markets, create competition. The problem at stake today, and on this, at least on this, I think we all agree, is we don't want to get to 2030 with those 42 million people that are not connected to fiber to the home. We all want to get to the 2030s with 100% of the Europeans connected to fiber to the home, or to the 2035, or anyway, in a more reasonable time frame than the one that we are facing. The question is how, and that's what we are contesting right now in Brussels. So I'll tell you how we think that it should happen. It should not happen top-down. It should happen with investment incentives that improve the return on investment, because that's the thing that has been lacking in Europe. When you compare our market to other markets, and Draghi put it in his report, our return on capital employed in many markets, in most markets, is lower than the weighted average cost of capital. It cannot work like that. It's not sustainable. So that's the engine that to us, for us, needs to be twisted. You cannot just come in Brussels and say, okay, I'll put a copper switch off date and that's it. Okay, it's nice, it's an ambition, but are you really going to help the market to get there? That's one. Two, we still have this system, the so-called ex-ante system, SMP system, which is basically that when one of my members is doing an investment in fiber, because that's what they're doing today. You'll remember that I mentioned that over 50% of the fiber investment comes from our members. The first thing that they think is not the market and the shareholder, but they think, I need to go and ask the regulator. I need to go and negotiate the conditions with the regulator. And that's not an ideal place to be as a company. So if I summarize it, what I would like to see is that we stop being addicted to regulation in Europe and we move to a more commercially driven mindset, because the objective of today is to get to that full fiber scenario as fast as possible and no longer to just create competition. We need to keep competition. We need to keep a healthy retail space. But the issue at stake today is to accelerate and to really get that investment boost. So we need to address the issue of today, not the one of the 90s.
Okay, great. So this is a good way to start the second round, and then we'll open up for Q&A if there's a couple of questions. So investment and business models, very much shaped by the framework where companies operate. I think I'm going to reverse the order following up on the spicy remarks from Alessandro. So deregulation, I think in Europe they had 18 ex-ante markets 20 years ago. Now there's only 2. So there has been a trend to move to ex-post enforcement. And you mentioned being ambitious in the DNA. So let's get into it. If you can, with just a short follow-up, what exactly was not there that you would like to see that would render it more ambitious to actually get both competition and investment in the market? Because I think you did say that competition was important.
So first of all, let me say the good things in the DNA that I believe the whole industry and the whole ecosystem would like to safeguard. And we need to keep an eye on this, because now what is starting in Brussels is a long process that will last maybe 1 year, maybe a couple of years, in which European Parliament and member states will be able to amend the proposal, the draft law of the Commission. So the good thing is this signal on spectrum. That's life-changing. Many operators in Europe are vertically integrated. So I think that also for a fiber-to-the-home audience, it's important to know that there has been a positive signal on spectrum. We need to keep an eye on it, because that's about harmonizing conditions. Spectrum is a natural resource like land and other things. So member states will try to pull back a bit on what the Commission is trying to do. Now, I said before that we didn't see this good signal, or as good as a signal, on the access conditions. Our view as Connect Europe has been that competition needs to be safeguarded, but the old ex-ante model, or significant market power SMP model, is the wrong way to do it. So our view is that you should focus on the real bottlenecks of retail competition at the retail level, at the local level, and when there is a bottleneck, the regulator must have the tool to intervene, because here we need to protect the interest of the consumer. What we would like to see at the same time, though, is that the investment in fiber by the operators is not automatically regulated, so that there isn't an assumption for regulation. And in this sense, that's where we hope to see more and better in the proposal of the European Commission. Because, as also Camilla said this morning in the panel, and Lucrezia yesterday, in the end, they are keeping the same model. If you keep the same model, I don't think that we can send a clear and strong signal to the markets and to the investors. The other aspect is the copper switch-off. Right now, the approach, because we are keeping the regulated model, the approach on copper switch-off needs also to be regulated and needs to be, well, I'll give you a date, top-down, when you need to switch off, instead of looking at it in an incentive-driven way. Because one thing we all agree on is the end goal, which is let's move to fiber as fast as we can. We are keeping, in our view, a bit too old of a system.
Great. So let's move to fiber, and let's move to the other side of the Atlantic. And maybe feel free, both Jimmy and Gary, to complement each other with this question. So we talked about the policy enablers. You spoke about public funding, and there was a very important the Infrastructure and Investments Job Act that was ambitious, with $65 billion US dollars to deploy a broadband infrastructure, with 42.5 in the BEAD program. So what remains to be done? What did you find were hurdles? Very briefly, and both of you can make a binôme here, and tell us a bit about it. Go ahead, Gary.
Go ahead and start.
All right, I'll start. And so, coming out of COVID, we're really looking at inflation and how to fuel the economy. And so across Europe and the US, huge investment, right? Taking out, throwing money into the economy to try to keep basically running into a big, not only recession, but depression. And so Congress took out $65 billion, $42.45 billion was for basically a program to end all subsidies. We're going to just put a huge investment in so that we can connect every American with fiber. And what happened? The last administration, 4 years went by, and they did not get the program out the door, right? So you kind of missed the whole window when the economy needed to get jobs and money in to fuel the economy and so forth. And so then so they got right to the goal line. They had basically all ready for people putting in their final proposals, and the first 4 proposals had been approved. New administration comes in the door and says, we don't like anything those last guys did. And so we're going to stop. We're going to rejig the program after you've already lost 4 years. And so we lost another year. And so one of the things that the new administration and Secretary Ludnick from Commerce basically said is we don't want this market distortion that the Biden administration had put in place, where they were putting their thumb on the scale saying that you want everybody to have fiber, because that's putting all, the government dictating the technology, right? But if we were to focus on speed and allow any technology that can meet 100 by 20, such as LEO satellites that happen to be from Elon Musk, who was the largest single donator to our campaign, that would be great. And so what they did is they took that $42 billion and they said, all right, we're going to rebid now all the states, and we're going to do this, what we're called the benefit of the bargain round. So what we're going to do is we're going to squeeze every awardee to make sure that any amount of subsidy will make it so your business case is marginal, so that as inflation and high interest rates, things go up, that you will default, and so we can make room to give 880,000 locations to Elon Musk and to Starlink, right? But if you're a LEO operator, you're not building any infrastructure, so what you're doing is you're providing service. And so since you're providing service, you'll give you 4 years to build. So from now, you have 4 years to get your constellation in order. And then from there, you have 10 years to meet this standard of 100 by 20. So 14 years from now, you'll be able to get 100 by 20. And meanwhile, all the other providers that are providing fiber have marginal business cases. So we took the $42 billion, it ended up being $20 billion. So half that money is now, and so we are setting ourselves up for a high level of defaults. And so now that then we have the second $20 billion, what we're calling non-deployment, and Commerce hasn't quite told us what we're going to do with this money, but by law, it goes out to the states. So it's been, a statutory obligation to deploy this to the states. So as you can tell, I'm not too excited about this, but and Jimmy, maybe you can kind of, because one of the things I did mention was on, the tax benefits and things like that for private investment. And I said 8.7% of capital is government funded. Well, of the rural deployment, that's 30%. So at 8.7 is really going to rural. So it is really important for rural communities to be able to get that federal funding.
Yeah, when you look at the BEAD program, it had a lot of hope. When you thought about the fact that back in the 30s we had the Electrification Act, which got electricity to every home in the U.S. That was the goal. Now there were some that didn't get it, but the vast majority of the U.S. was covered with electricity. Well, BEAD was the hope to do the same thing with fiber. To Gary's point, the fact that it didn't get implemented in the amount of time of the administration with the Biden administration, when the Trump administration came into play, they changed the rules, if you will. And it went from a fiber preference program to a neutral technology option. And to Gary's point, it drove the investment that was going specifically to fiber and cut it in half. Well, I'm a rural guy, so that frustrates me to no end, because here I was seeing opportunities, even if my company wasn't going to be able to connect, folks in rural Kansas or Nebraska or anywhere else in rural U.S., somebody was going to be able to get them connected with fiber. And so this was a huge disappointment. Gary didn't mention it, but there was another LEO satellite company who's not even operational that received millions of dollars through this program. How does that make any sense? It made no sense to me. So this is a situation where, because politics got in the way, we didn't get money out the door to do things that could have been done and could have people connected in a short amount of time. And we are yet to even get those funds engaged. And so it is disappointing. And, Gary's earlier point where they were using speeds as thresholds, again, back when it was getting everybody to have electricity, it was getting electricity to them. Getting fiber was an opportunity that we're now missing out on.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. And I wanted to open the floor for questions, but unfortunately, we have 6 more minutes. And I do want Laura and Jose Antonio to come in, because the connectivity ecosystem is really evolving with different players, private equity, you're in the wholesale part. But we also saw in the presentations, Gary, you mentioned AI infrastructure, huge investments, and that perfect storm and how it combines with the investment in fiber. So I will want to bundle this with both Laura and Jose Antonio. And how are you seeing how the connectivity ecosystem is changing and how attractive these investments are? Is this an opportunity, or is there a trade-off between fiber and data center investments? What are you seeing?
So actually, as an investor, we see this as an opportunity, really. On the one hand, in the US, it's impressive, this 42 billion BIP. But sadly, this is after what we are hearing. It seems that there is an investment gap of roughly 20 billion, right, to really reach a near universal basic broadband target in the US. In the EU, probably there was a different discussion around the digital decade connectivity target that is the predecessor of the DNA, and there we were aiming to achieve gigabit-capable network and 5G coverage in all populated areas by 2030. If we look at what is required to deliver those targets by 2030, we may be seeing a gap of 174 billion euros. So that's not a minor gap to reach those targets. So if I look at it from an investment perspective, clearly in Europe, the opportunities is larger. We have been seeing a first phase in which vertically integrated operators have started to carve out some of the passive infrastructure. That was phase 1, probably more linked to the passive infrastructure tower costs now being managed by infrastructure funds. And we are seeing a second phase of delayering the passive infrastructure as well. So as one example, when it comes to copper switch off that it was mentioned earlier, when we talk to operators, they are seeing that now they're having the building where they had their exchange offices through a sale and leaseback model. What we help them is really develop the space. They have the land, they have the power, and they have the fiber that actually is using less space. So for them, it's an opportunity to develop like cloud edge services, closer, computing is closer to the user. And this is huge, and we are seeing this across many different operators. Another opportunity that we see is more on the DACs as well. So it's the physical layer, and we see a case in which, for example, an organization, a company can own the physical duct and the operator retaining the ownership of the actual fibers and the switches with full control of that. So this layering of the passive infrastructure in this second phase linked to fiber, I see as an opportunity being an investor.
Great, thank you, Laura.
Okay, from an industrial perspective, I think investing in fiber is still a huge opportunity in Europe. I think I fully agree with Laura, but we need to find the right models, especially in non-mature markets, okay? And I think wholesale platforms or fiber costs, let's call it like that, could represent a key role, okay? In non-mature markets, because this fiber cost that requires a huge investment capex, to arrive, should be built up with sustainable models. And what is that? Mainly to have a good quality on the wholesale contracts. I mean, if you go to an area, you deploy, you invest, and you have the compromise of all the big guys to be there with you using the same infrastructure, you have a profitable model. And that should be agreed on the ground, okay, on these countries. And on mature markets, like Spain, for example, I think fiber costs like us or other players, I think we do play a different role. On one side, we are ensuring upgrading technology in the networks. I mean, we are pushing the market to move forward. And taking the point that was mentioned previously, we are also ensuring competitiveness. And I think it's very important. In this conversation we are having in Europe, in which concentration seems to be the only door for everything, we need to think on the final customer. And I think it's important that platforms as us ensure that there is competitiveness, that the infra, a critical infra as fiber, is accessible to everybody. And I think we can play a critical role there. So if we look on that, we will have a significant role on the future. And finally, I think fiber, because we should look on a very long-term models. And let me introduce a couple of things that we are seeing that are very interesting. On one side, we always think on telco market as operators, but I think this is going to be redefined. We are seeing energy companies coming into telco arena. This is happening in Italy, where many energy companies are offering a full convergent pack with energy and telco. Yesterday we've seen that the giant of retail, Lidl, has announced they are coming into telco arena with mobile and convergent offers to their customers. So we're going to see a mix of companies going into the telco arena in the coming years. I'm thinking about Europe, not sure on the States. And platforms, fiber cost platforms will be the key support for all of that new businesses. Think of IoT companies, think of hyperscalers coming into telco arena. So I think the map is going to be redefined. And connectivity, open connectivity for everybody is going to be a must. And I think investing in that type of models of the future is more than profitable and reasonable.
Well, great. Thank you so much. So now just to close, 2 words that you want the audience to remember to close that you think it's important as a wish list for a future-ready policies to promote fiber for all. Let's start with you.
I will get the words I was saying before. If something works, don't change it.
Don't change it. Great. Thank you very much, Gary. I mean, yeah, sorry, Jimmy.
So I would just say, don't let speed, dictate where you're trying to take connectivity. That's more than 2 words, but really, numbers shouldn't be the infrastructure. Fiber needs to be the focus.
Great. Laura.
I would say collaboration. Collaborative models than the ones that we've got are key to unlock the capital and deploy the networks that we need and we deserve.
Great. Gary.
Permitting reform. I didn't get a chance to talk about that, but that's really a lot of our big focus right now is to accelerate deployment.
And Alessandro.
Refocus on a return on investment.
Return on investment. So please join me in a big hand of applause to our distinguished panelists.